Howdy, folks. I know this could easily be mistaken for a dispatch from Halifax or a Goldman Sachs "this is what you should invest in" announcement. But you would be mistaken. You're listening to a guy in a flat, not a representative of a multinational brokerage firm. And this is not investment advice. I'm Arthur S. Falls. You're listening to Beyond Bitcoin. This is a kind of audio log of my journey through the world of next generation cryptocurrency and related technologies. Today, the Royal We has an interview with Bas Wisselink, a member of the Next community. It's part of an ongoing exploration of Next that was sparked by the release of their asset exchange. I'm obsessed with Next right now. They have everything that I understand to be really important in an alternative cryptocurrency. When I contacted Bas, I intended to speak about the Next asset exchange. That was the plan. But after I ran out of questions, we kept talking and I found that he had a lot more to say about building communities and understanding their dynamics, something I've tended to overlook as the community element. The interactions of its members and the organic construction of committees to achieve goals suited to centralized solutions is something that Next achieves extremely well. And maybe this is the reason for its incredible rate of development. Bas gave me a perspective on what it is to see a community develop from an early stage and struggle from mega beginnings against the massive hurdles to become one of the heavyweights in the altcoin world. Hey, how's it going, Bas? It's good to finally meet you.
Hi. Busy day, but everything's fine.
The big question I've been waiting to ask you, and I know a lot of other people have been thinking about this as well, how on earth did you manage to get such a well-populated exchange right at launch?
These are basically it's an ongoing discussion at the moment because a lot of these assets are jokes. As you can see, if you look at it, some people are just people like to play with new things. So what you see, well, I think at least 40% would be just people making an asset to see what happens. There is a group of assets for one person who is basically a robot, we all think, because he handles so many projects. And he has now issued a lot of assets to be able to fund this finally. So that's it. Lots of people, because a lot of people already knew, of course, that the asset exchange was coming. So quite a lot of people were already preparing things to launch at launch day. So they did just that.
It did happen really fast. It's quite a...
Yeah. We have a different community. If I look at other projects, this is not meant in any way derogatory about other projects, because if there's one thing that I know in the Next community, we actually like other projects because we're in the same zone of interest. But people like to build things within our community, to like to try things out and are not afraid to do that. So that's the only explanation I can give. They see a tool coming and already start thinking of what can I do with that. And well, now that it came out, boom.
Yeah, and there's so many ideas that are that build on what's already out there or alternatives to ideas that are already out there, like Sia. You know Sia, like a decentralized Dropbox. I don't know if you know anything about it.
Yeah.
Were those people preparing that specifically for the Next asset exchange, or has that been in the...
Yeah, I know something. I believe actually a month before SIA came along, there was a project that was called Storage Coin. And this was meant to be on a parallel change on the Next blockchain, actually. And as far as I can see, SIA is either someone took the idea and developed it themselves, because it was deleted twice from Bitcoin Talk.
Yeah.
disappeared, and the guy was tenacious and posted it again. But I think the person who is developing this is also quite familiar with Next. So because the idea of storing things on the blockchain is not a new idea. So he's probably a member of the Next community, but probably under a different name.
I did see some other enterprises that were employing parallel chains to achieve their ends. Is that something comparable to what BitShares is trying to achieve with their multiple blockchains?
It is basically, as far as I know, the same. Yes, it's the idea of running several chains for different purposes at the same time. And it's not a new idea again. A lot of these ideas are also present in other coins, of course. So there's a lot of crossover. I believe that within Next at this moment, the project is on the back burner, though. It's not one of the priorities at the moment.
Well, you guys don't, at this stage anyway, don't have blockchain bloat or anything like that to worry about, really, I suppose.
Not yet.
Yeah.
But we will.
Yeah.
We will. But then again, we already also have the solution for it. So that's integral to NXT is the fact that we're also implementing blockchain pruning.
Blockchain pruning. Could you explain that?
Well, not technically, but the idea this idea has been floating around since the start of NXT. It's actually one of the features that was in there at the top. If NXT, as for this is something that you also should discuss with the technical guy that you're going to talk with. But as far as I know, our blockchain is supposed theoretically to be able to handle 1,000 transactions per second. This is theoretical, which would mean an enormous amount of data. So the blockchain needs to be able to be pruned. And one of the things that the original plan for NXT had in it was the ability to prune the blockchain so it doesn't get enormously bloated, because otherwise you would need a larger computer every time you download the damn thing. So but it is possible in NXT to prune the blockchain to make it light, to keep it light. But I don't know the details for this.
There's got to be so much going on in this project with all the features that you guys are intending to implement.
It's a step-by-step thing. One of the first things that we really wanted to do was the asset exchange. At the moment, we're working on the alias system that already is in place, but we're now also making them tradable. So it will be able to go into decentralized DNS systems, but to do that, we needed to be able to trade aliases. One of the other things that's already implemented, people are now starting to develop things for, is basically an arbitrary messaging system. It is basically decentralized data transfer. That's also in there. It's been a bit snowed under the asset exchange, but it's a core feature that we already had since December, I think, in January, I think, which makes it easy to build applications on top of the blockchain.
So there's an asset on here, Dots for Bits. I've read a bit about it, and they claim to offer 1,000 TLDs, which to me seems maybe a little bit gratuitous. Does this use your alias system?
No, this is, as far as I know, I read the prospectus yesterday, the business plan too. No, it's basically Dots for Bits. As far as I see it, is just a traditional domain service. But based in the crypto world. So they boast a substantially lower percentage of costs, whereas normal domain services, I think, are 20%. They offer 10%, so that's half. And that's basically their business plan as far as I know. And the idea about the asset in this point is basically they use it as a fundraiser to start up. That's the long and short of it. Probably they will move into aliases once it becomes viable, because why not? But at the moment, they are concentrating on being a basic domain service, like GoDaddy and those kind of services.
I'm actually waiting for my client to load up, but because I'm so far away with such a poor connection, it's not really cooperating. But so what can you do with it with your IPOs? I know there are so many on there, and I guess right now, what features does the exchange support?
Well, the basic thing is that I noticed that there is a lot of confusion about the word exchange here, because for most people who are used to cryptocurrency, the first thing they think in an exchange is basically things like Cryptsy and Kraken, like coin exchange. But I think there's a language barrier here. Our first developer, the person who created Next, but also we don't know, he was pseudonymous, called BC Next, and he's disappeared now. He went out like Satoshi. He was Russian, and I think the word exchange that he uses is much more basic. It's about exchanging tokens, and you can exchange anything. It doesn't need to be an IPO. You can do an IPO, make it a digital share or a bond, but it can also act as a shop. For instance, if you issue the share car or Volvo and give those numbers, and you want to trade Volvos, and you can prove that you actually own these things, because that's the difficulty with an exchange, of course, then you can trade Volvos or anything. The exchange is not about being a stock exchange. It's about shoving tokens on the system. That's it. It's much broader. So any application that you can build that makes use of that, it could also, you could also, for instance, make them tokens for being able to download music. You could sell those too.
And the way you said it allows you to, say, trade Volvos or content, I guess.
Content, yeah, that's the broadest term, yeah.
In a sense, is this an effort to increase the liquidity of what would typically be considered, less liquid assets?
It is a possibility of it. It's basically what the asset exchange, and the asset exchange is identical with colored coins, by the way. It's the same principle. That's exactly the same idea. So it's not really a scheme to enlarge liquidity, but it is a consequence of it. It's a consequence of the whole concept of a digital unit that can be traded. It takes it just a step farther. It says, okay, it's digital, it's an arbitrarily named token, so why not make it completely arbitrary? That's basically what it does. You can assign anything to it instead of just calling it Next. It's basically, you have tokens on the blockchain to which you can assign arbitrary values and trade them. That's it. It's as simple as that. And Colored Coins does it on the Bitcoin blockchain. They are dependent on the Bitcoin blockchain. We are not. So that's one of the more powerful things. It's integrated with our system and not built on top of someone else's service. So we are free to do what we want with that. But the principle is assigning an arbitrary value to a token and trading it on the blockchain.
And in the case of Next, or of the Next Asset Exchange, I saw you guys have a 1,000 Next fee for issuing the asset.
Yeah, exactly.
And then also the same asset names are allowed to be reused for different assets. So there's the potential for some degree of confusion there. I was wondering why was that allowed to be the case? Why were there allowed to be multiple assets with the same name? Is that to prevent people squatting on asset names, basically?
Exactly. Knowing people like we know them on the internet, and what is that people would immediately squat Google, Apple, any of these names, and that even if we actually were able to grab some of these big companies to come onto our blockchain, we would have a big problem. So assets, names, the name that you see, the label is free, is reusable. The one thing that the two things that distinguish the asset, they have a numerical value, which is unique. This is the unique identifier, and it's connected to an account. And if people issue an asset, they should always, and everyone who issues a legitimate asset does so, they will also give out the unique identifier. This also means that people can, for instance, one of the things that we knew that would happen would that people immediately issue the asset Bitcoin. And if it's given away and it would be unique, it would be given away and squatted immediately, and probably be a scam.
I saw there are a bunch there. I suppose the one of the rationales behind creating a bogus asset like that is just to pick up the poor people who confuse it for the actual one.
Yeah, that's happening, and one of the things that is also going to be implemented very soon into the asset exchange is a reputation system, so you can vote up or down. So you actually have an internal trust system, so you can see, okay, this is an asset that can be trusted, and this is basically a scam or shit. At this moment, we do this on our forum, but of course, most people will not go on the forum and troll to all the threads to see which one is the right one. So actually, at this moment in our newest client, the whole asset exchange is by default empty, and you need to add the assets by hand manually. This is certainly not an ideal way to do it. So we're now working out for the new versions to work out an easy way to filter out the ones you really don't want to see. Because now the asset exchange is not filled up yet, but what happens if you have 10,000 assets in there? You cannot find anything at that moment.
Especially with a bunch of people doubling up Google and Apple and Bitcoin.
If you have, for instance, if you have 100 Googles on there, which may happen, you never know which one is. It's like Find Waldo. It's really, you will find it eventually, but most users, normal users, will just say, this is crap, I'll stop, I'll never use this client again, it's stupid. So we're working on both a third-party site. This is one of our community members who is going to start it up as a service, where people who have legitimate assets can actually post them with all the relevant details, and there will be a trust system on that site. And also we want to implement systems to make it very easy to filter out the bogus ones on the client itself, without getting in the way of the free market, of course, because we are not supposed to be the ones filtering things out. This should be done by users who actually rate assets. So this is still an ongoing discussion. How far do you go? We cannot decide which asset should or should not be traded. That's not our mission.
Rather just to actually put the infrastructure piece out there.
Yeah, and what we should do, this is something where we're basically in agreement. We should enable people to be able to filter them out, but it should be always a choice. If they want to see them all, maybe just for fun, you never know, they should be able to see everything on the asset exchange. So it should be a user action to decide to filter.
Because if it wasn't a user action, then that would be a point of centralization, wouldn't it?
Who would decide? Who would actually decide what goes on and what not goes on? It's point one. It's a centralized thing. It's a power decision. Who would have that power? And third is, who would be mad enough to take on that job? 10,000 assets, and every day they come 200 extra. I wouldn't like that job to filter through this and see which ones are legit. You'd be crazy to take on that job, basically.
Where are the fees for the asset?
So one thing asked about the 1,000 NXT. That's a spam measure. It's basically low. It's around $30 at this moment in fiat money, but it's a spam issue to make sure that not people make an automated script and spam the hell out of the asset exchange. So this is not a fixed number, maybe changed when next rises in value, but at least it should deter people from randomly filling up the asset exchange.
And where does the 1,000 next go?
To the Genesis account, it becomes fees. So actually, it made it very much more interesting to forge blocks at the moment, because there is basically a jackpot now. Quite a lot of people who are now, because we now also have leased forging. This means that you lease your forging power to basically a pooled account. Which makes it much easier for people to actually do the forging. But now there are blocks that have significantly more fees enclosed in them because people issue assets, which is fun.
A block gets generated every minute.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I think, what's the transaction rate at the moment? Do you know?
In transactions per second, that idea?
Yeah,
no, it's very low at the moment. Our volume is still significantly lower than the Bitcoin chain, of course, or the Litecoin chain. I believe that at this moment we could theoretically reach, without any different things done. We have a few schemes that will be implemented, but now as is, I think it's 4.8 maximum, 4.8 transactions per second, if the blocks were full. I think 255 transactions at this moment are possible within one block. No blocks are completely filled, although I saw some last day which actually had 150, 180 in them, so it's really beginning to fill up now, but we're not near full capacity.
But that's a lot of transactions in a single minute for an asset that I Next specifically, that I thought would be predominantly traded on centralized exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or at least I would have expected most of the transaction volume to take place on there.
Yeah, but a filled order. No, if you place an order on the asset exchange, that's also a transaction. If you send a message on a message or transmit data via the arbitrary messaging system, that's also a transaction. If you register an alias, that's also is also a transaction. If you rename an alias to point somewhere else, also a transaction. So all these things combine into a lot of transactions.
And do they all cost one Next each?
At the moment, yes. This is this was the default at the start, but it can be lowered or higher. But lowered is much more in the cards. It can be lowered when it needs to be. One of the first things that's probably now going to happen to the transactions is going to be divided by 10. So it will be 0.1 NXT, but all depending on the value. These markers, these milestones haven't been yet decided, but at certain points the transactions can be changed. Transaction fees can be changed, certainly.
Okay, yeah, because I was thinking with the messaging service,
yeah,
with the amount of to and fro.
Yeah, exactly. This is what at this moment the messaging. So a lot of people, when the messaging service started, were thinking this is going to be something like SMS or WhatsApp. But in fact, it's not like that at all. It can be used for it, and there is a company that's developing the infrastructure for it to use it on mobile phones. I know that because it's also very easy to encrypt it. But mainly the function of the arbitrary messaging system is for interfacing with applications. And for that, the transaction fees really need to go down. That's true. Now it's, I think, 3.7 cents. That's actually quite a lot for if you would use it in an application. if you have 3 to 4 cents for even one transaction. So, but that that will go down that will certainly go down.
So, is Next moving to a model where you have kind of a hierarchy of transactions, with higher value transactions or more expensive transactions like asset creation or asset issuance, and then less expensive transactions like the messaging ones?
There is as far as I've seen it, and there has been talk of these things. Most of the decisions based on for the fees are basically based on how much damage would it do if you don't do this, like the asset exchange. If the whole asset exchange would be one Next, it would be spammed. We would be you can be sure of that. So this was one reason to do that. Purely practical, not as a it turned out it's a good money making scheme, but it's not meant as such. In the Next system, we are in the summer. One of the unique part of NXT is going to be implemented, which is called transparent forging, which means, I will leave the explanation aside for now, but it means that we would be able to do virtually instant transactions. People could use the instant transaction service for an additional fee if they want to do really quick transactions. I know that there has been talk about that for those kinds of priority systems, we would be able to make a higher fee, for instance. But nothing's set in stone on that yet, because the discussion is still being had. If we should do that, we don't know, really. There's no consensus yet.
So what are you guys using for block generation right now?
Can you specify that question?
So, I mean, if you're not using transparent forging right now, what are you using to decide who generates a block?
This is one for the technical people. It's a proof of stake algorithm, but I'm not completely familiar with which specific one. No, this should go to someone who's really versed in that. Otherwise, I'll just spout idiocy.
Hey, okay, well then let's go kind of more to the surface of the whole thing. Apart from the fundraiser, are there any other advantages that the asset exchange offers?
Well, it could offer, it is like, as a fundraiser, there are different schemes. So people can just issue the asset and basically have no clue what to do with the asset afterwards. But it is basically possible to issue full shares if you have the legality figured out, because that's a big problem still. But one of the things that makes it really easy is that you could, as a shareholder, you're anonymous, but you could still, even if you're anonymous, receive the dividends, because the dividends are sent to the different assets, not to a person, independent on which account these assets are linked to at the moment. So that makes it really easy for that. But there is also an advanced implementation like the digital goods store, which basically means that you can trade these digital goods. Those are the most well-known applications at the moment. I don't know of any other implementations at this moment. But I envisioned myself, for instance, if you want to do things with cars, there are cars that, for instance, start with the digital key these days. You could basically make the asset exchange a way of exchanging these digital keys, and keys represent the ownership, because you can't use a car without the key anyway. So basically the representation of the digital key would mean you are the owner of the car wherever it is in the world. It's so new that people are still figuring out how powerful it actually is. We don't even know ourselves, because it's very generic. If I say arbitrary value to a token, that basically tells me nothing yet until I figure out an implementation of that system. So for now, I think the most used are IPOs, or basically fundraisers. Those are the most interesting uses, just to get money. And I know, for instance, that from the conference in Amsterdam, Bitcoin for 2014, that banks were interested in this too, or at least in the way that this could be an ideal scheme for startups to make it easier for them to get money where the banks couldn't help them actually.
This kind of brings to mind the Oculus Rift crowdfunding kind of event where they solicited a bunch of funds from the community with the promise that for every person who donated $300 they'd get an Oculus Rift, paid for the development, or at least part of it, I'm not sure exactly, and then they turned around and sold the whole thing to Facebook.
Yeah.
Whereas to me it seems like it would have been much more fair if, along with those units of the Oculus Rift, the crowdfunders themselves received a proportional share of the company itself.
The thing is about all these IPO style things, all the legalities and the associated rights going with all these things lie outside the blockchain. For instance, the only thing that the system allows is giving out tokens and handing over the tokens, but the rights contained in the tokens are not visible within the token and have no legal standing. So anything that gets added to that, for instance, I would issue shares in my company and I say, okay, you get a proportionate share, you have the right to a dividend, and you have the right to vote in a shareholders meeting. I can tell this, but this needs to be done outside the blockchain because all these things are not supported within the blockchain. That's still one of the real challenges any asset exchange faces, of course. How do you guarantee the rights that you say you're giving people?
I've noticed when I was looking through a lot of the proposals for the assets that are on there, that is one thing that really, there's a gap there. The trading of the asset and then the promise that goes along with that asset is right now still just a promise.
Yeah, exactly. And that is for every asset exchange. The counterparty asset exchange, for instance, has exactly the same problem. Because how do you actually correlate the actual asset? And that's why I used the car as an example. How do we, because I can buy asset car on the asset exchange. That's easy. How do I get it?
How do you get the actual car?
The actual car is, for instance, with you in Australia. How do I get the car? It's nice to have the asset on my account. How do I get the car? All the agreements we make about that are outside the blockchain. They are not enforceable within the blockchain. It's not that I buy it and I'm guaranteed I get the car. There's a whole load of paperwork around that. And these things will really have to be researched. And then you get the whole the trustworthiness discussion. How do you? This is why we want to implement the actual a rating system in there, just like things like eBay do. eBay has a rating system for a very good reason. They cannot guarantee products either. They can guarantee that you see the product and that you buy it, but not receipt. And it's not enforceable at all yet.
Aliases aren't live yet, are they?
Aliases are live, yes. Trading of aliases is not. But the registration and use of aliases, there are plugins for all the major browsers too. You can for instance do NXT column and then your asset, and if it points to a certain URL, it goes there. That's the most basic function that you could do. So those, and within I think 2 weeks they will be tradable too. So there will be an alias auction exchange.
Oh, no way, that's awesome.
I'm very glad because I own 1,500 aliases which I'm waiting to trade. For 3 months already. That was a letdown.
yeah.
We could be rich by now, but I'll have to wait.
I guess that's how it is with all of these things, though. You know, they just take development time. It's happening.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I guess everyone's greedy and excited to
Yeah,
see
we
this
had
stuff.
actually with the ALS. Alias was the first extra feature that was implemented after the basic coin feature. And I know that that night the transaction fees actually spiked because I think 5 to 10 people spent the whole night registering every high profile alias they could find. So that was a fun night for a few people.
Oh, well, while I'm waiting for this to load, how did you get involved with Next yourself, Bas?
Uh, Bus, yeah. It's well, basically via the strange. I'm a very newcomer to crypto. Like a lot of people, I knew of Bitcoin already, but didn't really get into it. Then after the big boom came in December, I started to get interested. Wanted to look what it was. Then, when looking at Bitcoin, I saw already this is never going to work for me. The return on investment was too low at that moment. It was not really realistic to think that it would rise another in such amount that it would be interesting to invest. So I started to look to altcoins at that moment, mined a bit, and was bored within a week because most of the coins were blatant pump dumps at that moment. The only one that was interested at that point was Doge, which was launched, but I didn't get into it. And then I found Next. And it's a weird thing. By origin, I'm a theater maker and creative teacher. Now I'm a salesman. And Next had that creative buzz going around it. Where you could just jump in and start doing stuff and have fun and helping people. That was my main attraction to Next, actually. And if you saw a hole which needed to be filled, a gap that needed to be filled, you just jumped in and started helping people. And that's basically still the same. It's still possible within the community to do that, to see, oh, there's no website for this, and then you build it and actually get mostly at least you get some donations for it. So it's an easy way to earn money with that. For me, the most important thing was I didn't want to buy in. I only bought in for a very small amount, and the rest I earned by working.
Okay.
And just doing things that were needed. And it's a meritocracy. If people see you're being useful and being helpful and providing a service that's needed, they will actually donate. And it's a very good way for people who don't have enough money to buy themselves into these things to be able to get into it and have a stake.
I suppose that's interesting you say that. That's kind of the idea or the whole, the whole advantage of these new systems and these new organizations and ways of bringing communities together to produce or to to develop a common project.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also everybody has a different view on things, and you can still implement that. It's not like in Next, it's not needed to be a developer to get in. It's just as valid to get in if you're a writer, or if you can make a video, or if you can just use mail and mail people. All these skills are valued. And what I mostly saw in a lot of other communities was that basically the developers were the ones in the driver's seat. And in NXT, of course, the developers have a very important place because they're basically giving us the things to work with. But they're definitely not the only people who are valued. And that creates a very nice feeling of equality and possibilities. So if you have a skill, you can use it and expand it and learn. And I think that's a very nice thing, because if you have a skill in the real world, it's much harder to get an equal amount of appreciation for that skill most often, because you work in a company where you're 1 in 100 and you just do your job. And here you can make your job. You say, I like this, I'm good at it, or otherwise I'm going to develop it, and I'm going to do my damnedest best to make this work. And if you put in the hours, you actually get a return on it.
There is a real vibrance in the Next community that you don't see in all crypto communities.
No.
I wonder how it is that you feel the Next community is different, or how other communities, let me rephrase that, I wonder how other communities can replicate what Next has experienced.
Well, one of the, let's see how to formulate it, because it is different. One of the things that I've noticed at the start when I got into crypto was that there was a lot of belief hanging around that it's possible to get something for nothing, which is basically a dream. It's impossible in any way to get something of worth without putting something of worth in. If you manage to do this, because it does happen, it's called luck, nothing else. And it happens only to a few people, but it seems that a lot of people try to replicate it, and these are the people who are basically mostly ripped off. If a community wants to keep people and attract talent, the one thing they need to do is appreciate it if you get it for free. And that's one of the things that I saw in the Next community, but also one of the things I've always fought for to keep. I've worked with a lot of volunteers in my life, and the one way to always keep a volunteer is to feed them good food. That's really a basic rule for volunteers, but it's also to appreciate them, to tell them, if you weren't here, my job would be so much harder, or even if you weren't here, we wouldn't have been able to pull this off. If volunteers know this and feel this, that it's genuinely, they will walk through fire for you. In Next, this happens a lot. I see a lot of people recognizing talent, seeing the hours put in, and basically telling people, wow, that's great that you do this. Thank you for being here. Instead of, yeah, but we all work hard, and basically you're just asking for attention. That's a totally different approach. I'm totally not saying that other communities do this all, but the communities that fail mostly have this problem because they're not supportive of each other. Communities that win are always the ones who appreciate its members and give them some leeway without giving them excessive rules or mistrusting them. For instance, before we had all these clients, people were just working on these clients without without a central group checking these clients. The checking was done afterwards, when they had already produced what they thought was the best client they could make. And that's a different thing. Instead of telling them beforehand, okay, you can work on a client, but it needs to be this and this and this and this. That feels like mistrust to a lot of people, and they will just say, okay, fair enough, but I'm not going to do it. So it's about trusting people, giving them freedom, and when they pull it off, to give them loads of appreciation.
And that's what you find in the Next community.
Definitely. I see that all the time in the Next community. Not from all, of course, but the most influential people at the moment who also did their own thing. And in their toe, because leading by example is the best way to get things done, it's always about this. It's about telling people that you really like them being around and taking work from your hands and contributing and saying, okay, you're a part of this. You are one of the people who is making this possible. And it's not a lie, it's true. If we didn't have all these people working for us without asking for any money, not asking, if they get it, they're glad, but they're not asking for it. If we didn't have those people, NXT wouldn't be where it is today. And we are very conscious of that.
I mean, that sounds to me like you've got the combination of an incredible group of developers and a fantastic foundation, And then also you've got this really open and encouraging and nurturing community that together is the ideal crucible for developing this core system, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And I suppose those are the 2 or 3 fundamental components of creating one of these communities and organizational structures that Next represents.
Yeah, there's I think 2 other components that are also very important. People, most of the people in the Next community think long term. They are patient. For instance, it has taken in December already. There was talk of the asset exchange. 2 weeks ago it went live, and people basically didn't make a real big fuss about where is it. No, they knew that the developers were working on it. They have seen it, of course, on the testnet, but they knew that quality takes time. And if they didn't know it, then they could see from other more experienced people in the group that this was basically what was going on. There was a lot of trust in the developers, not always, of course. Everybody has its motivations. We're not a bunch of saints. Let's make that absolutely clear. But patience and long-term thinking is a lot of the people in the Next community hold on to Next because they think in a 1 year or 2 year or 3 year plan. They don't think in I'm going to be rich in 3 months, because they know that's not going to work. So they don't get disappointed. They know in a year we will be maybe there, but maybe less or maybe more, but it's realistic. In 3 years, we have no clue, but we know that if we're still around at that moment, we will be settled. So that's an important thing. And another thing that's now developing, because that has taken us a long time, because we are decentralized, is that we now are starting to get comfortable with the idea that it's possible to be decentralized, but still having structures, temporary structures, to work in. So sometimes it's needed for people to take point and form a committee, for instance. And for that time, these people hold extra power because they can decide over funds, for instance. And after the marketing committee is a good format for that, for instance. After a while, the goals of these committees will be met, and then these committees should disappear again, because the mission has been accomplished. And that way you are still decentralized, you don't have a head, but you do realize that for some functions you need some kind of structure. And that's also a very interesting dynamic that's emerging. It took a long while.
Could you explain how that dynamic works? To me, I imagine someone steps forward, says, "Hey, I'd like to organize a committee for this purpose. This is how much I think it's going to cost. These are the people I'd like to have involved, or would anyone like to get involved?"
That's one of the ways you can do it. We actually do it with what we call the Next Foundation, which is not at all like a thing. It's the Next Foundation is very informal. Basically, it's a marketing thing and a group of people with skills in certain areas that wants to scale Next to the next level. That's a few people got together and said, this is what we're going to do. We see a gap here, we're jumping in. We're going to take point on a few things that we know about, who wants to join us, and we'll see what comes from this. This has now taken form. That's one way. Another way was we had unclaimed coins from the IPO of NXT at the start. 9 million coins were still unclaimed, and we decided we are going to put these in 3 funds, 3 million in each, and we're going to fund marketing, technical development, and infrastructure. And we're going to do a vote on who should be on these committees, 5 people per committee. And there was a vote over a week over who would be heading this, and the internals were left up to the committees. So this was basically a grassroots vote. That's also possible. There's also the possibility that one of the real big stakeholders, because we still have quite a few of those, say, okay, I have basically an endowment. I'm going to give 3 million. I'm putting these two people in charge, and they are the master of this fund, and they can use it as they see fit because we trust them to have a lookout on NXT and hand out bounties. That's also a possibility. It can be very easy and just say, here's your bag of money, do something nice with it. So there are different ways in in which these structures that are seen as needed can take form. And I think that we will see different ways in which people will organize themselves around a specific cause. I can, for instance, imagine that now that we have the asset exchange and we're going to get businesses into Next, that maybe these businesses would form a kind of committee to forward their agenda. That they would say, okay, we want to organize things to make it easier for coming business to move on to the blockchain. And we're going to provide them with documentation to make it easy for them because we all benefit that way. There's numerous ways in which people can get organized while still being decentralized as a whole. And that's actually quite amazing if you see that. One of the defining characteristics for all these groups is basically that they have a limited scope, after which they should probably end. So if the Next foundation, of which where I'm a member of this moment, if, for instance, the mission has been accomplished that we put ourselves in, we'll probably just say, okay, either we're going to change the mission or we're going to end the group. But you never know this. This is emergent behavior, and you cannot predict it at the start.
One of the core ideas that you see in these new communities that develop around blockchain technologies is these emergent but familiar organization types, like the old corporation as an entity for a purpose. Once that purpose is achieved, it's dissolved. And to hear you talk about these kind of the spontaneous organization of committees, that to me is reminiscent of that old way of doing things, and how this is just naturally redeveloped is really it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's nice. It's also very good, I think, to see because, as I said, it was a long process. Because at the start, everybody equated decentralization with basically a fear of anything that would lead to a concentration of power. So anyone who would have tried to start these things in the first 3 months of NXT would have been booed away very hard. Because, oh no, we're decentralized. But that led to absolute chaos. And once people saw that and saw that, bit by bit, that it doesn't need necessarily to lead to a concentration, inappropriate concentration of power, then the way was open for, okay, but we're going to concentrate power with only a very specific goal. And when it exceeds that, then we need to ring the alarm bell, because then we are in basically dangerous territory where several people get too much influence in certain things without having to call back to the community. But it's finding out how this works and where the balance is, and that's a fascinating process. It's about getting things done and recognizing that, something we call power goes with that, but also that power in this way derives from basically having a mandate to do a very specific thing. And you need it for that. And afterwards, you need to discard it too. One of the defining characteristics of a good committee is, I think, the amount of limits they place on themselves. If a committee says, okay, this is what we're going to do, and if we're going to do this, please tell us that we're going in the wrong way, that's a very healthy sign, I think.
Could you share your thoughts on collaboration with other cryptocurrency communities, Bas?
If there's one thing that I took from the Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam, it's that at this moment in time, it's so silly to burn each other. We had so many nice conversations with the guys from Ripple Labs, who were 2 booths farther up. And basically just, how do you do this? How do you do this? Okay, yeah, we were really stupid doing this. How did you solve it? These things are important at this point. We're fishing in the same pond, that's for certain, but none of us has found the golden formula yet. And as long as that's not done, it's very productive to be in contact with each other and learn and basically just express interest in each other. So yes, definitely interested.
I'm sure there are many projects that are really struggling to drum up the kind of community spirit that you've achieved at Next. Do you have any advice or suggestions for people who would like to replicate what you've achieved?
No, but it's difficult for anyone. I think we're quite lucky. We have a few very experienced community managers amongst us. We have a lot of forum experience, a lot in real life also group experience. There's one guy who's basically a professional crowd controlling person who has a lot of experience in drumming up, in getting huge crowds to move in a similar direction and giving them a feeling of accomplishments when they met their goal. And that really helps.
This is a major unexplored part of the process, is the actual development and nurturing of the community, you know?
Yeah, it's also a thing that mostly gets forgotten.
It really does. It gets completely forgotten. And I find, that Next has this energy that Next has, and the productivity and the turnover of ideas seems to me to come largely from the stimulation of just general activity as opposed to directed, a grand direction.
What we put a lot of energy in the start when when in December the most influential people then were the developers, and this is normal because they were bootstrapping the system. At the same time, there was a lack of basically lack of coordinated community movement. There were a few forums, but that's what about it. And a few people stepped into this by basically leading by example and showing, okay, this happens when you do things. And a lot of people were basically inappropriately in awe of the developers. And this is normal because people want role models. And they were afraid to put forward ideas, basically on the basis, I'm not smart enough, my idea will never get accepted, blah, 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 these kinds of things. Perfectly normal human behavior. But actually, the developers were basically constantly asking, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? But nobody stepped forward because they were afraid to be branded as stupid or something like this. At least this was one of the things that I noticed, and a few others. And we stepped in, as far as I can see. Just by then, a few of us started proposing things or giving answers or asking questions and showing that our heads didn't get bitten off. And in time, more and more people were feeling comfortable with basically just stepping forward and starting doing things. And once that ball gets rolling, then you get a momentum in that, and everybody starts feeling fed. The developers are getting real feedback instead of basically applause, which is also, again, because of that inappropriate awe. And people start feeling really part of the community, right? They see real results from their proposals. And that's so important because it's all new. So everything is basically valid at this moment. So why not put in your 10 cents or your 2 cents, even if it's 1 cent, and see what happens?
You're absolutely right. I see. You do get there's a lot of yes men because people don't feel that they are in a position to criticize, and that doesn't really. It's not conducive to it doesn't add to the feedback loop.
No, and the developers are just as are in that kind of process. The developers are just as frustrated as anyone because they don't get useful answers. They are when they are asking, yeah, does this work? Is this okay? And they only get, yeah, it's great. Doesn't help at all. So they need to hear, no, actually, I have a problem with this. This button doesn't work, or it's in the wrong place, or I can't read what the hell is on this button. What do you mean by this? I don't understand. These are all things that developers want to hear. They actually want that feedback. Not everybody, but most. Some people cannot handle feedback. That's a different problem, but it gets time. It's all about also for developers who can't handle feedback. It's all about fear. It's all about, oh my, somebody is giving me feedback and they hear your shit. Well, actually, somebody is just saying this button is the wrong color. This is a different thing. It's not that message. The same thing happens with community that says, okay, I don't like this color of this button, but what will happen if they say, please leave our community now? That's what they're afraid of hearing. And and if that happens, actually, because it does happen, then it's not a community. Then it's basically someone asking for applause. And then you need to run away and be as far as that community anyway, because it'll never be open and will crash in time.
Well, because you get that creeping centralization, I guess, in there, even if it's not, even if it's just an attitude of superiority.
It's these kinds of communities that do that will always fail, because in the end they will lose all support. And without support, every crypto depends on the network effect. So if you lose that in your own community, you're dead. Anyway, nobody will use your coin. Nobody will run your nodes. Nobody will hash your coin, and basically that means you're dead. So,
because the core function of the community really is to be that that seed for the network to crystallize around.
Yeah.
And it's that seed that needs to be nurtured and allowed to be as productive as possible.
Yeah.
I guess to get that start, to make that network begin to grow as quickly and as healthily as possible.
Yeah. And especially to live through the early times. I know that around Christmas time we were basically finally really becoming in the picture, and we had a huge DDoS attack. And I remember one really frantic night where everybody was putting nodes up, VPSs. One guy set up 100 all over the world within one night and kept updating us, okay, new one. It was a brilliant night because these people did it for free. They just said, okay, we need this now. We're under a huge DDoS attack and we need to be safe. And it was fun. It did cost money. But it was also, if you don't have a community at that point, we would basically have been DDoSed to death at that point. And instead we had a really comfortable night at Christmas with the whole group basically saving the network and saying, yes, haha, we live, face. And this is Christmas Eve. So that was actually, it can go two ways. You can say, okay, we're having fun with this, or you can say, I'm not going to invest in the community and basically be blown off the map in one go. Could also have happened. It didn't.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, now we get to the point where we have a lot of people who aren't even in the community anymore because they basically just buy Next and don't want to be that involved, and it doesn't matter. there are now people running nodes who we don't know. And that's the next step. It was the same in Bitcoin, of course. At the start, everybody knew everybody. Now, hundreds and thousands of people are running nodes, and they're not in contact with the greater community because they don't want to. And that's valid. But that's when you survive.
It's really awesome to hear you talk about it. I haven't heard anyone talk about the community side of this at all, really. People reference communities, but no one talks about how they actually work and the importance of them. And I think that's the missing part of the discussion, really, that's taking place right now.
The one group that did it really well and amazingly well is Doge. Doge is a community. It's, even if you can say anything about the fact that it's a blatant fun copy of Bitcoin and badly implemented or anything, but the community is the best community, or at least, I still think the best community of crypto out there. And it actually saved face for all the crypto communities when Bitcoin was in really bad weather, with Mt. Gox collapsing and with China and with Russia being really difficult. Those were the bad stories out in the press. And then comes along the Doge community with, we're going to put a Jamaican bobsleigh team on the Winter Olympics. We're going to do charity work. We're just having fun with this dog on a coin. We're going to have parties anywhere and have fun and being nice about it. At that moment, Doge provided with their community a vital counter to the bad stories about Bitcoin. I'm convinced of that. And even if Doge doesn't survive as a coin, which I doubt, but that doesn't really matter, they provided a vital counter to the larger world for what cryptocurrency also is about. It's about creating and having fun and doing something new and being excited about it. And they did that. And that's admirable, I think.
I hear this idea that altcoins dilute the digital scarcity that Bitcoin represents. And it's interesting to hear that there's actually, or to hear you say that there's actually a lot more that a coin can bring to the table than just diluting the scarcity. There's a lot more going on in an altcoin. There's an actual community that performs functions and defines itself separately to maybe what the Bitcoin community does, that it can have its own identity.
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think it's gross overestimation of the influence we have in the world as cryptos in general to say that we're already diluting the pool. We haven't even scratched the surface of the amount of people that could use digital coins. So when you basically don't even represent 1% of all the economy of the world, and then talking about diluting the pool, that's basically saying that you're diluting a thimble full of water. That really doesn't work for me. This is overestimating our influence at this moment. We haven't even started yet.
Hey, it's awesome to hear your perspective, Bas. And also even to see people see this going on in Amsterdam. You know, I'm the only person I know in all of my country who's involved in this.
Well, actually, one of the developers is an Australian, so so you're not alone. That's good too.
Cheers, Bas. As always, hit up beyondbitcoin.fm for this interview in a less edited form, and our subreddit for information on developer hangouts. I'll see all you folks next week.